So this session is Drupal for project managers. What you need to know to be awesome. I didn't make up the title, but it worked. My name is Robert Laszlo. I am a program manager at a company called Blink Reaction. Oh, come on in. I've been managing technology projects for more than 15 years. I stopped counting at some point. I am a certified project management professional, which is a certification that you can get if you are serious about pursuing a career in project management. I'm also a certified Scrum Master. My buddy Ray also works for Blink Reaction. Ray, you can introduce yourself.
I'm Ray Saltini. Have been around Drupal for about 9 years now in various different roles. Getting rolled over in some cases by all sorts of technology, curves, my own shop. But in the last 3 years as the director of the Blink Institute and our training programs and all-around open source evangelist. And the purpose of our efforts in the training area is to help folks do Drupal right. And that fits in a lot of categories. Coding, if you will, programming, but also especially project management, which we think is a key area. So happy to be here and help as the case may be.
So Blink is primarily a web development shop. We do large-scale Drupal projects for large companies. Some of these folks you may recognize. We also do have a part of the company that does training, which is called the Blink Institute, and that's what Ray's in charge of. Some of the services we provide, this is the real quick sales pitch, classes and courses. If you're interested in any of that, talk to Ray. So this session, we're going to cover kind of three things, and one of the things is I wanted to let you know up front is that my challenge was to take this. This is actually a full-day course that we offer. Take that full-day course, which has something like 100-plus slides, and squeeze it down into 45 minutes and actually give you something useful that you can hopefully walk away from. So some of the things I'm going to go kind of high level. Actually, all the things we're going to go high level. But three important things. We want to talk about understanding Drupal. We think it's really important for a project manager managing a Drupal project to understand how the application works. What it is, how it works. We're going to talk through the life cycle of a project and some of the most important things that are unique to a Drupal project. And then we'll talk about what you can do beyond this session to continue your education. So very quickly, just a real high-level sense. Actually, before I do this, back up. Show of hands. How many people here are currently managing a Drupal development project?
All right.
Almost everybody. How many here are expecting to manage a Drupal development project in the near future? Sort of, yeah. All right.
And how many people feel like they know nothing about project management whatsoever? A few.
A few? Okay.
And you got saddled with it? Yes, no.
So those folks who are managing or expecting to manage, yeah, that's kind of the question I want to know is, do you feel like you are experienced project managers and Drupal is new, or is it you're new to project management and Drupal? How do I do that? New to Drupal, okay? New to project management, a little both, okay. So hopefully there'll be something for everybody here then, I think. Real quick, what is Drupal? Drupal's the amazing thing about Drupal is that this application is used to create so many different kinds of things online. The Economist's website, all of their web properties are built in Drupal. You can build a search application like this one for the Florida Hospital. You can build community. This is Twitter's developer site is Drupal. It is multilingual. One of its tremendous strengths is the CMS platform. This site is in English, but if you look up here, you see there's Arabic, French, Spanish links. Whole site swaps out into those different languages. 140 languages? I can't remember.
Something like that.
Yeah. Citizen engagement, the White House website is famously built in Drupal, but also other sites like the petition site, which shows up in the news every once in a while. That is actually a Drupal application. You can go and petition the government to do, I don't know, build the Death Star, that kind of thing. Colleges, universities, higher education. Here's a couple of examples. You heard Yale uses this widely this morning. Build a library, online content. This is Warner Music, correct? Every Warner Music band artist has a Drupal site. Bob Dylan has a Drupal site, which I think is kind of cool. USA.gov uses it to do URL shortening for all the federal government websites. You can build services on top of Drupal. So Drupal Gardens is built with Drupal. These other Buzzer, which is a service to provide websites for small companies, it's got Drupal in the back end. And you can use it to create products. So a company called Commerce Guys has taken Drupal. Got Commerce Guys in the room?
Yeah.
All right.
Commerce guy.
Commerce Guy.
Yeah.
So Commerce Guys, so they've taken Drupal, created a distribution. We'll talk about distribution just a little bit later on. Created a distribution called Drupal Commerce that is basically out-of-the-box e-commerce platform. Of course, they use it for their own services when they're going out and doing consulting and setting up online stores. But it's free, it's open source, you can download it, you can build your own online store using it. All right, so how does it work? Well, before we talk about how it works, we can take a little trip down memory lane. We're going to talk about the history of web development. In the beginning, in the Stone Age, it was all about files sitting on servers, right? Static pages, you needed to know HTML, you need to know the markup, you needed to know how to get to the server, how to FTP, hopefully. Everything was served from the file system. This was all technical. Business users cannot participate in this except to provide input. Right? I want a website, I want it to do this. And then the geeks had to take over and do the rest of it. Static stuff, that quickly became old because people wanted more from that. Static was not going to work. We had to have some dynamic content. We had to have applications running on these servers. So databases come into the picture. Still all programming, all technical. No business users. Now we're talking about real programming languages like ASP, PHP. Even more technical, SQL. And this was what had to get created in order for all of this to work. The hard part was the business's input at this point was simply design for the most part, right? They draw pretty pictures of a web page, hand it to the development team, and they have to turn that Photoshop comp into working markup and SQL code and everything. And then if you want something to change, you've got to change it in multiple places. There's testing involved. It is difficult. So that's when we got these content management systems that started to come into the picture. Commercial CMSs and then open source CMSs. The big deal, the reason we have these content management systems is so that the business can participate. There is a real separation of the content, which the business users provide, the text, the images, video, audio, whatever it is, from the code, which developers create, usually in the form of templates. They come together dynamically through whatever magic the CMS is built on, and they create the web pages. So the users can participate with a very little technical information, right? Maybe some basic markup is about the extent of it and how to get into the interface. But what's interesting is that the website, this web application, becomes an application to configure itself. So, and that's kind of what Drupal is. There's a lot of database interaction. There's a lot of functionality that's basically built into configuration and often stored in the database. This is true of Drupal. This is true of SharePoint. This is true of most of the major CMSs. And this also allows you to scale. You can create Single platform, you can build lots of sites on top of it. On a real quick high-level presentation of a simple site, here's your database, here's your Drupal application, you've got the theme files, there's a server out in front that gets the requests, Drupal grabs the content and the templates, sends the request back to the user, and it happens dynamically, instantaneously, hopefully, if the server's set up right. Of course, there's caching involved if you want to scale. There's multiple front ends if you want to get big, but that's the basic idea. So now today we've got mature CMSs. Drupal 8 is a fantastic piece of software. I think back to when I started working with the very first CMSs, the things that we take for granted in Drupal 8, its taxonomy power, its image styles, all of that, we had no idea how to do that back in the day. So smart and efficient reuse of content. You're going to hear me talk about that over and over again. Strategies for maintaining and deploying not just the code, but the configuration. That's my new favorite thing about Drupal 8. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So as a Drupal project manager, it's important, you may be coming from a different place. You may have worked with other CMSs. Maybe the people on your team have worked with other CMSs. Maybe your client is migrating from another CMS. So one of the things that's important for you all to know is what is the difference between Drupal and, say, maybe SharePoint or .NET Nuke or whatever was the other thing. So for Drupal has this multi-layered approach that starts with the content. Content is key. Content is the base. Content is the foundation. On top of that, we build functionality through the use of modules, both in the core and contributed or even custom. On top of that is the display. So I've got content, the functionalities, the modules are pulling that content out of the database. What am I supposed to show in this moment? Is this user authenticated? If so, is this user an admin? No, he or she is anonymous. Then I need to show something different out of this content and functionality. And Drupal does this on the fly. Layout comes next. So, okay, now I know what I'm supposed to show, but where is it supposed to go on this page that I need to send to the user? And then finally, okay, what should it look like, right? Should this font be blue? Should it be bold? What's the spacing? Where does the image go? That's how Drupal works. Most other systems, the functionality is kind of the base. They build the code, which grabs the content, and the appearance and the layout is all wrapped up together. It's a far simpler approach. Systems like, worked with a customer that had something called percussion. This is how percussion works. This is how Joomla works to a large extent. So that point about these multiple layers and the content being the most important thing as the base, we're going to come back to. Here's another representation of it. This is a diagram straight from Drupal.org. It shows how the content is grabbed by the modules and then determined where and how to be displayed in blocks and menus on a page. What's the permissions of the user that's asking for this? That's kind of the last step before throwing it all together into a layout. They call this the Drupal flow. And to build a Drupal application, you need to understand this at a fundamental level. And as a project manager who's managing a team that's building this application, you need to understand it too. It helps for troubleshooting, it helps for estimating, and validating what your developers are telling you. So, Drupal site is made up of a bunch of things. The most important, the first thing is you need your web server. You need a piece of hardware, I should say. That can be your laptop. If you're working locally, it can be up in the cloud in Acquia. On that piece of hardware, it can also be virtual. It doesn't have to be a real piece of hardware in the cloud. On that hardware, you need to have a web server application running. Typically, it's Apache. You need a database server, which is most often MySQL. You might also need a search server. Depending on what the requirements are for search, you may implement something called Solr. On top of that is the Drupal application code, which is mostly written in PHP. In addition, there are plugin modules, mostly written in PHP. The themes, which is the presentation layer. Themes are made up of PHP code, templates, and JavaScript and CSS. How many people know all of these terms? Familiar? Yes? Am I boring you? This is all right. So one of the things about this slide, and it's kind of hard to see the colors, but some of these things are files sitting on the server. These things are files, the brown, whatever color that is. Files you put up on the server and can move around, can commit into a source control system like Git. The blue represents the stuff that's in the database. You need both to make a Drupal site. Configuration, so which theme am I using? What modules are installed and enabled? What blocks are going to go on which pages, if you're using panels, etc. All of that information is actually stored in the database, which does present a real problem for most projects. We'll come back to that later. Content is in the database, of course. So if this is a website for the camp, right? In that database is the schedule of sessions. The users are in the database, so whoever's registered, as well as the basic stuff like who, what, where, when, why. All of that's in the database. The content that's in the database also needs some files. Often, most of the time, images are files that are up on the server. Sometimes there's attachments like PDF files, image, video, etc. Files on the server. And then there's other support, housekeeping stuff. Also, most of that is also stored in the database. So you've got hardware with the basic applications, web server and database. And you've got files and the content configuration in the database. Content. Drupal, when you talk to a client, they think of their content as being text and photos. And from a Drupal point of view, it's data. It's broken down into something we call content types with fields of information stored separately in that big giant table database. Clients don't get that. That's one of the things you have to work through with them, is that you want a site that shows maybe press releases. Well, that's not just one big blob of text in Drupal. You've got to break that down. A press release will have a headline. That's a field. Press release will have a publication date. That's another field. That field is actually a date field. It has a specific format. You do that with all of the kinds of content that you're going to put on the site. And that is the first most important task in terms of the building of the project, is to break down the content types. Taxonomies, so using the taxonomy system on how you're going to tag content, how you're going to relate content. And then there's this awesome thing called views. Everybody know what views is? Views is so awesome in Drupal 7 that it's now built into Drupal 8. It is a core module in Drupal 8. Views is one of the very unique pieces of Drupal. None of the other CMSs that I'm aware of have anything nearly as powerful as views. Views is basically a visual, user interface driven way to build queries. Some very, very complicated queries that you can package up and put into blocks. So you want a block on your home page that says these are the top, most recent press releases. Build it in a view. Click, 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 point, save, and you've got that. You don't need to write SQL. But the views have to know what the content looks like. And you've got to break down that content right for you to be able to make the right views. A little bit more of the guts of it. There is Drupal basically runs on the LAMP stack. Linux is the operating system. Apache is the web server. MySQL is the database. PHP is the one requirement here. It's flexible. You can use other operating systems. I have Drupal running on my Mac OS laptop. You can use other web servers, Nginx, very popular new web server application. And theoretically, you can use Postgre and even Microsoft SQL. And I've even heard of somebody using Oracle. But yeah,
Postgres is more theoretical.
more than theoretical.
That's all we use.
All you use. So MySQL is the most widely used one. Postgres is, I believe, is clearly the second most popular. Then some of the other commercial ones you can use, but do that at your peril. Because the community generally uses this stack. And if you want support from other people in the community, you're more often going to get help if you're using this stack. How am I doing on time? I think I'm going to skip through this if you don't mind, Ray.
Yeah, I think it's...
So why do you choose Drupal compared to other CMSs? It's highly configurable, extendable. There's a large and active community. There's an ecosystem of service providers like Blink, like Acquia. The other CMSs don't have that. Now the truth is that most project managers, you don't have a say in what platform or technology gets used. Usually somebody's made that decision for you, handed you a project and said, make this work, right? But understanding kind of what Drupal's strengths and weaknesses are, there are weaknesses. It is not the right tool for every job. But as we saw before, it can be used for a huge number of things. So real quick, most Drupal sites have kind of this going on. At the core, which features of the core are you going to enable and use? Or is the base package when you go to Drupal.org, download and install, you get this. And then you got to decide which ones you're gonna keep in core. Then core is fine for building the very, very most basic, super simple blog site. That's about all it can do. That's all you use. So everybody then immediately goes and tries to figure out which contributed module they need to install, which contributed modules they install. I think I read somewhere that most commercial sites have usually around 100, 120 modules enabled and running in production, in combination of core and contrib. Things like views. In Drupal 7, it is, I think it's the most popular contributed module in Drupal 7. Web form often used if you want to ask, put a form on your site for anything, contact information, etc. A base starter theme. Most theme development actually will start from a starter theme, something like Zen or Omega, thank you, yes. All of those base themes give you a framework that gets your themer started. They don't have to build everything from scratch. So these are typical contributed modules. Then you may have some third-party integrations, which are always probably going to be custom for you. Like this, maybe some other systems, services that plug in. So custom integrations, third-party integrations. So a Drupal project is going to end up with this. So let's talk about a project. Who can tell me what the two primary project management methodologies are, or philosophies are? Yes, ma'am.
Waterfall.
Don't look. Yes, and the other one?
Are they up there?
No.
Agile.
Agile.
And Agile.
Waterfall and Agile. Waterfall is considered to be the traditional methodology. Everything is a separate phase. One phase falls to the next. You generally don't go back, and the next phase can't start until one is done. Waterfall is known to be fairly document heavy. All requirements must be gathered up front and handed off to developers. So if you're going to run a Drupal project in a waterfall method, you might have something like this. You start, you get the project kicked off, initiated, you do some discovery, requirements gathering. We call it discovery. Other people call it requirements analysis. Build out your information architecture, you do your design, you hand that off to the development team, they build it. If there's content migration involved, you got to bring the content in when the site's ready for it. You test it, you launch it, you hand it off to maintenance. This is a circle, but could also be visualized as a series of steps downward. There is nothing wrong with this methodology. Many projects are run this way. It is considered to be old-fashioned, however. The other method is called Agile, which is kind of the new kid on the block. It's not really. It's actually, these concepts have been around since the 50s. But, by the way, waterfall comes out of manufacturing and the military and the aerospace industry. And you're going to build a aircraft carrier, you do it in the waterfall way. You don't iterate through your aircraft carrier construction.
It's not solved.
What's that?
It's not solved.
It's not solved, yes. You don't have a beta. Agile basically has all of those same steps. All of that work that's described in that waterfall slide I had a second ago, requirements gathering, information architecture, design, development, testing, all that stuff still has to happen. It's just a matter of, in Agile, really, it's visualized as a circle, and it's visualized as a series of circles. Because you break the project down into smaller bite-sized chunks and do all of that in a real short span of time, a time block. So you may have an iteration of 2 weeks that goes through all of those steps just to get sort of the core part of the site built out. Then the next most important features to the client will go through this same wheel: design, build, test, deploy. So Agile, I don't know if you've ever heard that saying that the right way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So that's where Agile comes from. It's the concept of breaking a giant hairy project down into bite-sized chunks. The reason this methodology is used a lot in website development is because the client doesn't always know what they want. And it's almost impossible to visualize every single detail, inch, function of every single page of any given website. Comment?
Yeah. But go ahead.
I'm going to say, I call this the Heisenberg principle of supplying software.
Mm-hmm.
The act of giving a client what he says he wants changes what he wants.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And this assumes change. The other big difference between waterfall and Agile is that a waterfall tries to discourage change. Because if you're spending 2 months doing nothing but requirements gathering and documentation, and you're going to hand that off to the developers, and they're going to go away for 3 months to build all of that stuff, at the end of that 5-month process, if you realize, oh crap, we forgot something, that's expensive, right? This, if you're doing 2-week cycles, and you realize that the thing the client said 2 weeks ago, maybe now they want a little different flavor of it, it's okay. You've only theoretically wasted 2 weeks, not 5 months. Yes, sir.
A lot of it has to do with, in software, it is to do with the tools that you have. I mean, even going into hardware manufacture now with digital printers, 3D printers, things are going to change in that fashion as well. And as we look forward on all of this, the cycle you go through, if you take specifications on a business and then come back 6 months later and hand them a solution, their business has changed. You may have gotten everything right up front, but by the time you get back to them 6 months later, they've had to totally trash a whole line of products, reprice everything. They've had to look at total different models of even selling what they sell. So
That's right.
it just doesn't work.
Business priorities change. Your stakeholder may change. I was on a project for a federal government website, building this new site for it was for the National Institutes of Health. At the end of the 6 months, suddenly our director changed. She was replaced, and the new guy was like, "This isn't what I want." Threw the whole thing out.
So I mean, the one thing, and I know we're going to speak to it a bit, but the trick here, of course, in working with your client and working with their changing needs, is as a project manager to help them manage their priorities, right? So, you know, if we were to use the agile method in a building a battleship, we not only is it expensive to iterate battleships or aircraft carriers, but we might, you know, in the process of scope creep, right, we might forget certain critical things, right? It's the agile method is very susceptible to that, unless as a project manager we keep those priorities elevated. And that's the wonderful thing about the agile method, is because some of those priorities may be undiscovered until a new iteration.
So there's lots of other additional details. I actually have given presentations on just agile myths. We can talk about this all day. But I want to talk a little bit more about your role as a project manager. So PMI says project managers do essentially these things. You initiate the project, you plan the project, you direct and manage the project, and you close the project. There's lots of processes involved in each one of these different quadrants. How many people here are actually PMPs? Anybody? Got one. Okay. This process, it's actually called process group, also breaks down into two sub-processes. And this is where you spend, this is the work of the project right here. You've made the plan, now you're executing. This is the execution phase, where all the real work gets done. You're creating the deliverables. You're creating the designs and the code. Within this process, you are monitoring the work, comparing it against the plan. You are reporting on that, because if you don't tell your boss or your stakeholders how it's going, then they assume nothing's happening. So you have to control it and report on it. And you have to then manage change. And change comes in two variations, two different types of change. There's variance, which is, I planned for this task to take 8 hours, but the developer took 20. That's a variance. Now what am I going to do about it? That's a change you have to account for. Right? Drop a feature, extend the deadline. What are the project's primary objectives? The other type of change is a change request. Client has asked for something new. Both have to be dealt with. So you're doing this in a loop constantly, and this is where the project manager he or she shows their true colors, their leadership skills. It's your job to make the plan, and it's your job to make sure the plan happens. So you lead the project, you make the plans, you direct and manage, monitor and report, you deal with change, and you manage risk. I always believe that a project manager is like an insurance policy. Project managers should be looking for problems before they happen, of course, dealing with them, creative problem solving when they do happen. You need to communicate the risks in advance as much as possible. You need to let the client know that, hey, you know what, if we don't get this deliverable by this date, that means we're not going to launch on time. They need to know that in advance so that they get their stuff together and they give it to you. And if they don't give it to you, then you can say, hey, I told you, you know what, we can't launch. Mitigate the issue, escalate when necessary. And of course, you are also there to provide expertise to the client. So the more you know about web development, Drupal, your specific market that you're working in, whether it's higher ed or government space, you're also there to provide expertise. And hopefully you have hopefully you've developed a level of credibility with the client, that they ask you these questions. It's important to start the project off right by talking to your stakeholders. You have to figure out exactly who are all of the stakeholders. And it's easy, believe it or not, it's easy actually to miss somebody that's super important in the background, that's actually controlling whatever, right? You need to evaluate the risks at the beginning. You need to create that project charter and statement of work that says, this is what we're doing. This is what success looks like. Get that defined. If you're working for an agency, that'll come in the form of a statement of work. And hopefully it's pretty clear as to what the objectives are. And the objectives need to be spelled out in terms of scope, What are the goals? What should this website do? What's the schedule? I need this website to launch before the beginning of the fall semester. Otherwise, it's not worth it to me. You've got a hard and fast deadline. And what is the cost? Super important. And that cost mostly isn't the form of dollars, but if it's an internal project, it may be expressed in terms of how many people I can afford to put on the project. You've got to estimate. So once you've got all that information, you've got your statement of work, you make the plan. This is how we're going to do this, how we're going to get this done. You've got to estimate the tasks and come up with a timeline. One of the questions that often see struggled with is how much time, how much budget is there for the project managers. Unless you work for an agency that does this for a living, it's often easy to overlook the time that a PM needs to do all of this work and to make sure it happens on time. We have a minimum of 25% of the overall development cost, but often we bump that up if the project or the client seems risky. Create the schedule, then you got to go get your resources, right? Who's going to be on this project with me? I'm a project manager. I can't actually do the work. I need a front-end developer. I need a back-end developer. I need a QA engineer. I need somebody to help with content migration. Figure out what those are and make sure that you have them lined up. And then you need to have the kickoff where you communicate all of the above. Kickoff is also your opportunity to set the ground rules with the client. Educate the client about your process. One of the things about a Drupal project is that content comes first. My own experience is that clients don't want to talk about the content. They want to jump right into the design. They want to start sketching the homepage, like in the first meeting, right? They want to get their crayons out and start picking colors and images. Hold on, time out. We got to talk about the audience and what the audience wants from the site, the content the audience wants from the site. Let's figure that out first. And that often frustrates them, but the estimate of the amount of work needed to accomplish the project's goals, 200 hours, 1,000 hours, whatever it is, obviously that has to inform your schedule. And you need to look into any risks that may impact the schedule, like vacation time, like holidays. So on a high level, you may actually have, again, breaking things down into chunks and organizing them for the client. We often break a big project, an end-to-end project. We often break it down into 3 big stages. First stage is all about, all right, we're going to try to, you have some ideas, you have some goals. You want to do whatever, but it's not specific enough for us to estimate each development task there yet. It's still too vague. So we will go through a discovery and planning phase with the client. And often that'll be budgeted separately and handled as a mini project, where we get into the requirements with them. We diagram the content types. If they're talking about they want to do some sort of personalization on the homepage. Well, personalization could be a billion different things. What does that mean exactly? Walk them through it, because they don't know. So we'll do a discovery and planning phase, which will then often lead to design and architecture phase. Then we'll actually start drawing wireframes, the information architecture. We'll also do system architecture. What kind of traffic is this site expected to have? Do we need redundant multiple web front ends? Do we need what's the failover plan? Then these 2 things will feed into the actual web development project itself. So now we have a design, we have requirements, we have clear estimates, we've got a plan now. We can go ahead and build it, test it, and launch it. And that will probably be this, and these 2 actually, will probably be agile sprints. Maybe you'll have 2 sprints of architecture and design. Maybe you'll have 4 sprints of build, test, and launch. Kind of an idea of a fairly simple high-level plan. I'm not going to spend too much time there. One thing I want to talk about is the risks. Drupal projects have some specific risks. There's also risks that are inherent in all projects. Stakeholder management is a risk with all projects. It is important to identify all of them. You kind of got to figure out what their goals and expectations are up front, as early as possible. and determine how that stakeholder wants to be communicated with. You know, I've got a very nervous product owner on the client side. He or she wants to talk every day, and you've got to make time for them to connect with them every day. Another one, I just want a monthly report. You know, I'm letting my technical PM on the client side. She's going to take care of it. If there is an immediate problem, she will escalate to me, but I do want to see a written report every month. Figure out exactly how they want to be communicated with and what the correct medium is for that. Requirements, by the way, I am going fast because I'm still staring at the clock back there. But if you do have questions, just raise your hand. Requirements are always a risk. We often, in an Agile world, Agile talks about doing requirements using something called user stories, which is user-centric on purpose. So the visitor to the website, define who that visitor is, what that visitor wants to do or needs to do, and why. The why is super important. So a user story actually has a very specific formula. As a type of person, I want to be able to do this so that I can do this, the why. An example would be as a content editor, I want to see all of the most recent content added to the site so that I can moderate submissions quickly. Now, that is still fairly high level, but that user story then gets broken down a little bit further into some details, and that can then be estimated. And you have a list of them. Those then get assigned to a developer. Your job is to make sure this feature gets built. And at the end, you test against them. If I go to the content moderation page, can I see what the most recent content is? Yes. Check. We have accomplished that. We struggle a lot with design. Design is subjective. Design is fuzzy. What you think is awesome, I might think is not so. Design traditionally, going back to the old days of web development, was basically doing Photoshop, right? Creating a picture of what this web page might look like, the home page. These are called comps, design comprehensives is what the comp means. They'll usually have like Greek type, which is fake, which doesn't help anybody. Don't use Greek type. They're flat. You can't click. I can't click this search interface. I can't tell what happens, right, when I do that. Or if I check multiple choices in a fairly sophisticated search interface, what filtering is the default? It doesn't show me that. The developer can't take that and build it. They're going to make guesses, and they're going to guess wrong. It focuses on the colors, the layout, and the images. And then when you try to take these static, flat image files and turn them into HTML output, inevitably the problems happen. So more recently, agencies have gone to left the comp world and started actually doing design in the browser, starting with fairly low fidelity prototypes without any design, look and feel, kind of get the layout and the blocks in place. Then through the iteration and addition of CSS and JavaScript and images, the client can actually look at it in their web browser instead of looking at these flat images. They can click on things. They can move it around. They can even see it in a mobile, right? We're talking about, we're in a world now where it's not just a desktop homepage in Internet Explorer. Although some clients, some companies still think that way, 50+% of all web traffic is now on small machines, mobile devices. Yes, sir.
Do you know of a fast way to build something like that? Because a lot of the time when we're dealing with new clients, they want as fast as they can to see what's going to happen. And actually building all of that and not billing them for that before, because a lot of times they don't even want to sign a contract or pay until they see exactly how it's going to look or something along those lines. So are comps better for in case they're more flighty and you only want to do the full JavaScript if you know that they're definitely hooked in?
I think you're always going to run into these problems. This idea of designing in the browser is a new concept. It does require that your designer can code, at the very least can code HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They are going to, rather than trying to, push the buttons in Photoshop, they're going to do essentially what they did before, but they're going to do it in code and see it rendered immediately in the browser. Now, this is a very big transition. I have met a few designers who actually have made this leap, and they're amazingly they're like gold. They can name their price. They can go to work anywhere they want. So if you're a web designer, go learn this, and you'll be set for life. But most of them still can't do that, and most agencies are still in this comp mode. I know there's some comments. The last thing I was going to say about that is that in order to overcome this, you've got to make a bajillion comps. Right? You've got to make a comp for every little button push. You've got to make a comp for every page almost. And that kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
It's good to use something to start, like Bootstrap, or a lot of people are using Pattern Lab now, which will help you build stuff up, and it gives you a lot of pieces and elements to put together something.
So your designer needs to learn those things. That gives them shortcuts. They can get a code prototype get working pretty fast.
And a lot of the pieces are already like responsive, and all
Exactly.
the buttons you need are there, and you just have to think.
Yes.
I've got a project right now, we were delivered 120 comps. And that's mainly because they have 4 user roles on the registration system. But we're prototyping that. And I mean, they gave us red lines and everything with the comps, and it's just not enough, like you say. And we're prototyping it in Jekyll. And so
It's another framework called Jekyll.
yeah, the markup is there and ready. But just with these comps, just cataloging it alone is so expensive.
And then so once you actually get, and one of the big problems is that often a designer will dream something up in Photoshop. They can make anything happen in Photoshop, right? But trying to make that responsive and efficient load in a mobile device in multiple breakpoints is impossible. And right.
The aspect ratio, the first time people see it in a browser, it's different. The colors.
Right. Going to render slightly differently on a Mac and a PC. That drives traditional designers nuts. Like, no, that's the color. No, well, you know what? It's not the color. Yes. Yes.
And I'd like to also make a point. We've just finished pitching a fairly large prototype, and it's amazing going into a pitch with a comp. Everybody likes what they like. They have opinions, but when they start playing and they grab their phone, they grab up a laptop, they grab up a tablet, you engage a hell of a lot more about the content. And I can tell you this is not an improvement, but it is advancing the conversation to content faster, but it's a whole new animal. It's a Bengal tiger. It makes a whole lot of difference. People don't like the way images change across these. You handle it as an image, you handle it as a background. You're going to create a huge firestorm, and everyone's going to like it or hate it. It's a whole new animal. It's new, and it's fun.
I am running out of time. I'm going to jump through some of these. I want to talk a little bit about resources real fast. There are 3 basic kinds of developers in the Drupal world. Somebody we call a themer, somebody we call a site builder, and then quote-unquote developer. All of them are developers. To be honest, they're all developers, but they're developing different things with different tools. And each of them have different requirements. By the way, this guy is Morton DK. Anybody know who Morton is? The king of the Drupal themers. So a themer, he or she wants complete control over the markup, if they're good. And Drupal doesn't let them have that. So that makes them crazy. And if they're new to Drupal theming, they're going to try to do it the not Drupal way. And as a project manager, you need to make sure everybody's doing it the Drupal way, including theming. The themes need to be sustainable and maintainable. Ideally, they know some site building and module development. It's not an absolute gray, black and white world. Site builders, they need to know some coding and some theming. They're primarily working through the UI. They're building views. They're adding blocks, creating content types, taxonomies. They have a struggle with trying to figure out which modules they're going to use to complete a particular task, because there's a billion modules for everything. Developers, especially if they're new to Drupal, they're going to want to not do it the Drupal way because it's not intuitive. It makes no sense. If I just write SQL code straight in here, it's going to be, I get the job done, right? Or if I go and change this one line of code in the core whatever module, problem solved. Don't let them do that. They also have to learn how to talk to each other and talk to you. Content migration is always a problem. Yeah. Lots of stuff that I can't talk about. One thing I do want to hit on, configuration management. Everybody know this problem? Is this familiar to everyone? Or is this, who doesn't know the issue with configuration management? I'll skip. Real fast, Ray, you want to talk about
Real
next
fast.
steps, learning, community?
So, I mean, this is obviously, we covered a lot of ground here. The one issue with configuration management, of course, is because we've got no longer flat files that are kept in nice, neat directory structures. We've got files, we've got code, and we've got databases. So configuration and deployment management is all about how we manage user-generated content, do active development, and manage all those different changes and keep track of them in different branches and forks so that we can have a production database that is rock solid while at the same time moving those changes forward. And there are lots of different very complex strategies in order to manage them.
One thing I would add to that is that if you have, unless you have one single person doing all of your development work for the whole site, if you've got a team of more than one, your biggest problems are all going to be around configuration management. You're going to spend most of your time trying to deal with code merges and database configuration changes on this site versus the staging site. That's where you waste time.
I think the key takeaway from this session that we designed it to do, and one of the reasons why we spent quite a bit of time on Drupal earlier on, is as project managers, your role obviously is essential. As Drupal project managers, the value that you add for your client is often a knowledge of Drupal and how it works. And in order to do that, you've got to do things like come to sessions and come to camps. And so we close it on this note that, you know, the real key to being an awesome project manager, and it's much different from the proprietary world, it's much different from the way we used to do things with waterfall methodologies, is staying engaged with one another and with the community. And it may sound like a love fest, but it's really essential. And we found that our most successful project managers are those that really truly are engaged with the community and with the process that's happening around the software.
How many of you have ever actually personally built a Drupal site or downloaded Drupal?
Yeah, and so build a site about something you love is really a great step, you know, in that direction. You know, could be knitting, could be fishing, could be any number of different things. But if you haven't done it, do it. How many folks don't have a Drupal.org user ID account? Okay, so you have homework tonight, right? And how many folks don't go on groups.drupal.org? Haven't joined an affinity group?
There is a project management group.
Good, excellent.
And Atlanta Drupal users group in Atlanta.
There you go.
On meetup.com.
We're out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert.